evolution in the cosmic human body. Questions naturally arise following a talk like the one given yesterday. Also, if it is the first time one has heard such a presentation of broad cosmic truths, some things may not be understood. I emphasized yesterday, and I ask you always to remember, that what I am describing here is not based on speculation or theory. It arises out of the real facts we call the Akashic Chronicle. Such facts can be put together into a kind of system only later. A question that might have arisen for some people should be anticipated here today. What is the status of the finished planets? Yesterday, from a certain perspective, we described the genesis of a planet to the point when it becomes an individual visible planet. But now someone might say, yes, but were the planets we see in the heavens not in existence before the moment described yesterday? The answer is, no, they were not. We must be clear about the following. When the moment I spoke of yesterday was reached, a new epoch began. Assume, for example, that we want to describe the origin of a planet, not as it occurred at the time of ancient Saturn, when only Saturn existed, but as it occurred at the creation of the Earth. First, we have the repetition of the Saturn stage of development. Then the stages of the Sun and Moon are repeated. The development of the Earth, likewise, begins with the formation of a tremendous warmth or fire body, just as I described concerning Saturn. Now the time came when, at a certain moment, under the influences of the zodiacal region of the lion, this great revolving globe of fire divided itself off. That is, this single Saturn, what we call Saturn today, reached its peak at the moment of its separation. Thus the individual planet came into being. You should not imagine, however, that the calming influences exerted through the lion stopped Saturn's motion completely. Saturn became a being that absorbed everything previously distributed in its periphery. This occurred through the influences of the lion. But now the large globe from which Saturn severed itself contracted, yet continued to exist as a smaller globe. Although the whole structure withdrew inwardly, Saturn nonetheless preserved some of its original motion. This was after a calming influence had been exerted and Saturn's movements inwardly came to rest. Previously it had used its own momentum, because by necessity, so to speak, it had to keep moving as if swimming within the globe. Now that the globe had been withdrawn from it, however, a self-impelled motion continued, even though the inner movement had been broken. This self-impelled capacity to move after the first impetus was given is the current motion, the current rotation of Saturn. A similar process occurred in the case of Jupiter, for as the Earth began to form, what has been described had already happened. Differentiation took place in the globe, which had begun to contract inwardly. Under the sign of Scorpio, the slaying of the individual globes occurred. These globes interpenetrated one another, and as a result each began its own inner life. After Jupiter, as a mighty life being, had, as it were, been slain. Let me read that again. After Jupiter, as a mighty life being, had, as it were, been slain, the life of the several beings on the planet began. As the globe contracted again, Jupiter, finding within itself the impetus to do so, continued to move independently. What we observe as the present motion of Saturn, Jupiter, and so forth, is a consequence. It began as the formative process I described yesterday was being concluded. Another difficulty appears to have arisen because I referred to Jupiter as the second planet and Mars as the third to detach themselves, whereas, chronologically, I mentioned first a Saturn stage of evolution, followed by Sun and Moon evolutions. This is totally justified. Our current planets arose during the recapitulation that occurred during the fourth stage of evolution, that is, during the development of the Earth. In the beginning, when Saturn was formed, only Saturn actually existed. When the Sun stage of development occurred, conditions in this second body that had formed require us to speak of a Sun. But when this Sun development advanced beyond the Saturn stage, the entire evolutionary process of the Sun ended. So when we look back on these first planetary developments of our Earth, we must be aware that they had also been completed. This is not true of the development of Earth proper. First, Saturn came into being. Then the Sun arose, albeit as recapitulation. But the process advanced inwardly. It was not completed. Jupiter is left behind as the remnant of the recapitulation of the Sun development. This is what we have to remember. Then the Moon stage of development is repeated on Earth. If we look back on this process of development as a whole, this Moon stage was brought to a definite conclusion at that time. But the Moon period within Earth development does not represent a conclusion. It continues, and Mars is left behind during the recapitulation. The current planets that are visible to us in the heavens must be considered to have originated during the time we call the fourth stage of development, the time of earthly evolution, according to our Akashic chronicle system. We have considered these things. It is impossible, however, to speak of the entire universe and mention every aspect of it. You may have noticed that first a kind of globe existed. I spoke, for instance, about Saturn, about a globe of fire or a large kind of fiery egg, and after that we spoke of a rotating motion. Indeed, we can think of a kind of egg or globe, and while each such globe, corresponding to the most primal condition of Saturn, rotates, increasingly a kind of belt is formed. It does not surround the whole of the egg, it is more like a broad band. Within this belt, various forms assemble that were created around the globe. This belt formation represents a general cosmic law. You can see that the law, under which everything moves toward a concentration, refers to a kind of equator or belt, and is manifest in the cosmos as far as you can survey. The Milky Way, for example, owes its existence to it. When you see the Milky Way as an outermost belt surrounding cosmic space with stars sparsely distributed in between, it is the result of the law that causes things to be gathered together into a belt as soon as rotation begins. Because of this, our cosmic system is lentil-shaped. It is not spherical, as is usually presumed, but lentil-shaped, and at the broad equator the belt draws together. You must also imagine such a band forming at the origin of a planet. To draw these stages schematically, take an quote-unquote egg and, possibly with red color, paint such a band around it. The whole egg must not be colored red, only the belt. The bodies selected to form a planet now assemble along this band. Here one would have to draw a point where everything comes together. Thus we see that the configuration, the distribution of the stars as set in space around us, is the result of the activity of spiritual beings or hierarchies. For when we speak about the contraction of great masses, we must be conscious that this contraction does not occur by itself, but through the activity of the beings we have described as the higher hierarchies. To sum up then, we can say that during the period when ancient Saturn, that is, when the grand fire globe from which our whole solar system issued, was formed, the spirits of personality were going through their human stage of existence. During the formation of the Sun, the archangels or fire spirits went through their human existence. During the development of the Moon, the angels went through their human existence, and on Earth, humanity now experiences its human stage. Yet it is also true that the human being was involved in all that previously occurred. What we call the physical body today received its first beginnings during the earliest phase of the formation of Saturn, The physical body was not yet permeated by an etheric or astral body then, but the physical body was already predisposed, once it had achieved the transformations that it would later experience, to become the bearer of the spiritual earthly human being of today. Very slowly, step by step, the human physical body was prepared during the development of ancient Saturn. Member by member, the parts of the human body came into being as ancient Saturn formed, passing through each sign of the zodiac. During the time when Saturn was in the sign of the Lion, the outline of the heart was formed. The beginnings of the rib cage came about as Saturn passed through the sign of the Crab. The predisposition to symmetry in the human physical form, the fact that the two sides of the body are alike, occurred when Saturn was in the sign of the Twins. In this way, we can describe the origins of every part of the human body. Looking up to the constellations where the Ram is found, we could say the foundations for the upper part of the head were established for the first time when ancient Saturn was under the sign of the Ram. The foundations of our speech organs were laid down when Saturn was in the sign of the Bull. If you now imagine the human being divided according to its various physical components, you will glimpse the creative forces in the zodiac that gave rise to each part of the human being. In the ancient mysteries, the zodiac was represented pictorially, much as we have it here on the ceiling of this hall. Indeed, by chance, but there is no chance, we are in a hall where the ceiling is decorated with the zodiac. Formerly, the zodiac was not depicted in terms of the respective animal forms. Rather, the various parts or members of the human being were assigned to their respective regions. The head was assigned to the sign of the Ram, the larynx area to the Bull, the arms to the symmetry of the Twins, the rib cage to Cancer, the heart to the Lion, and so on to the lower part of the legs assigned to the Waterman, and the feet to the Fishes. Imagine the zodiac as the form of a human being inscribed in the cosmos. There you have what created the original forms for the members of the human physical body out of the cosmos, out of the corresponding powers of the hierarchies of the thrones, seraphim and cherubim. This form is the great cosmic human being who strides forward in the wisdom, literature, and myths of the world, after which each individual human being has been patterned and created in the most varied manifestations. Think, for example, of the giant Ymir spread out in the cosmos, for the microcosmic human being was formed from Ymir, the giant. Footnote number 1. Ymir, the earliest being and progenitor of the ancient giants, was killed by Odin and his brothers. The earth was made from his flesh, the waters from his blood, and from his skull the heavens were created. End of footnote. Everywhere you find the great macrocosmic human, the creator, who represents outwardly what the human being contains inwardly. A profound truth lies at the basis of such pictures, a truth that, depending on the clairvoyant capacities of the various peoples, comes more or less perfectly to light. It also shines through in the wisdom that found external expression in the Old Testament. It illumines the wisdom that, as the esoteric teaching of the ancient Hebrews, creates the foundation for the wisdom of the Old Testament in the Adam Kadmon of the Kabbalah. Footnote 2. According to Kabbalah, Adam Kadmon is the name given to the first emanation from the eternal fountain. It signifies the first man, or the first production of divine energy, or Son of God, and other and inferior emanations are subordinate to it. End of footnote. The macrocosmic human is none other than the human being we have seen inscribed in the constellations of the cosmos. We only have to form concepts about this in the right way. What I have unfolded for you now, culminating in the instruction about the macrocosmic human being, are teachings containing the deepest secrets of the universe that will, gradually, flow into humankind's general education. Humankind is still far removed from understanding these teachings today, and if a conventional scholar listened to these lectures, that person would probably consider this audience as something other than a sensible group of people. Human beings are far removed from understanding these things today. But we are beginning an age when facts found to contradict the fantastic theories of modern science will urge people to seek the way to these encompassing truths of primeval wisdom. The mystery about the process of conception, for example, about which there is much childish speculation today, will not be unraveled until the teaching of the macrocosmic human is applied to it. Precisely what a real mystery is, and above all, what cannot be investigated by instruments and tools, will be illumined to the very minutest point of investigation. How small is the cell where conception takes place when compared to the cosmos? But only the mysteries of the great cosmos will solve the riddle of what is taking place in the smallest cell. Nothing else has the capacity to unravel the secrets of the processes within the cell. The contributions of exoteric scientific research to the problem of conception are by no means worthless, yet they strike one as mere child's play compared with the great mystery involved. This can only be solved when one understands how the answer to what happens at a particular point can be found only in the periphery. For this reason, the ancient mystery teachings said, if you seek to understand the center, investigate the circumference, for only there will you find the answer. Here is the essential part of understanding. You can grasp the point, what is at the center, only when you have understood the periphery, circumference. If you recall that the individual heavenly bodies remain in motion even after they have reached their own completion, so to speak, then you will understand what is meant by the karma of these cosmic bodies. From the moment when the planet itself has come to completion, the beings who belong to it must consider its dissolution, that is, its disappearance from the cosmic environment. For example, to describe the development of ancient Saturn, we must say to ourselves, until the contraction of the whole globe of warmth, the process of the Saturn phase of development is an ascending one, or, if you will, a descending one, in that it is a process of densification. But, speaking of the first Saturn stage of development, once Saturn begins to rotate on its own, the globe is completed. Everything having to do with it has been accomplished. The fact that in the process of dissolution, the spirits involved must take into account the forces that were active in building it up, that is karma. It is an inescapable factor. Things have to be dissolved in accordance with how they have been built up. The karma of the first half of evolution fulfills itself in the second. What was built up in the course of the first half of evolution is step by step dismantled in the second. The cosmic process of becoming is the creation of karma, and the passing away of worlds, in the broadest sense of the word, is nothing other than suffering under karma and the dissolution of the karma related to it. This is so for every planet, in all aspects, great and small. For each planet faithfully mirrors back the conditions of the formation of its karma. The same process can be observed in a people or a nation. Imagine a people striving in its youth and full of activity and energy. Imagine this people in successive ages, bringing forward various elements of culture and civilization. At a certain point, a zenith is reached, but also a certain amount of karma, a karma of a nation, has been accumulated. Just as karma has been accumulated during the development of Saturn, and one must consider what has come into being, so a people also collects karma during the period of its cultural growth. This karma is at its peak, at its strongest, when a nation has given forth its original and most elemental forces. We have seen that during every period there are guiding beings. We have seen in the case of the earth how higher spiritual beings, angels, archangels, and archai, descended, and where humanity could not make progress on its own, these higher beings guided humankind to a higher stage. These are the spiritual beings of the hierarchies who reached their maturity in earlier times. Once a particular stage has been attained, And once the beings who descended from heavenly heights to lead a nation have achieved their goal, other spiritual beings must take on the guidance of the nation. For a people to rise beyond its zenith, leading personalities must, of their own free will, allow themselves to become bearers of higher spiritual beings. Only in this way can a nation progress to certain stages beyond what was originally intended. But then something further must occur, namely, the beings who descend to guide a culture beyond a certain point in its development must take the accumulated karma of that nation on themselves. This is the important law of taking on the karma of nations or races. After a certain point in time, leading personalities must bear within themselves, must take on the karma of nations or races. Personalities such as Hermes took the karma inherent in their people, the accumulated karma, upon themselves. These things are reflections of great cosmic processes on individual planets. We have still other such reflected images. We have seen that the thrones reached their position only because they could make the step from the created to creator. The capacity to receive was transformed into a capacity to give. At some time in another cosmic system, the thrones developed to the point where they could stream forth their substance. Bringing and offering sacrifices indicates a higher stage of development than storing up what was present in the cosmos for oneself. This again occurs in a reflected form in the case of humanity. Look back spiritually through Atlantean and Lemurian times, and then look forward. Human beings receive their physical, etheric, and astral bodies. They receive the I. The I then begins the process of transforming the other members, the transformation of the astral body into manas, the etheric body into buddhi, the physical body into atman, that is, into spirit self, life spirit, and spirit body. In every age, primal wisdom has taught the following, that people transform their astral bodies so that, to begin with at least, a part of the old astrality remains, and the other part becomes manas. In time, however, they will transform their astral bodies completely. The astral body will then be fully permeated by the activity of the I. Take a person who has not yet reached this stage of development when the astral body is completely permeated by the activity of the I. This, with very few exceptions, is actually the situation for the vast majority of human beings today. What we've already transformed accompanies us through all of eternity. The portion we have not yet transformed, and in which the I has had no part, separates itself like an astral sheath as the human being passes through Kamaloka. It dissolves in the astral world, but not without causing considerable damage if the astral body encompassed bad appetites and passions. So we could say that human development consists of leaving less and less of oneself behind in the astral world. Let's follow this process through. A human being dies. Shortly after death, the etheric body is released, but a remnant remains behind. The person goes through Kamaloka, and the untransformed sheath is detached. The transformed part is carried in the I through all eternity, and is brought back in the new incarnation. The more perfected a person is, the less he or she will leave behind in the astral world in the form of remnants. Finally, one reaches the stage where none of one's astral body remains in Kamaloka. That is, the human being has come so far that such a person cannot harm anyone living on earth because of untransformed remnants left in Kamaloka. Such a human being, then, also has the possibility of seeing into spiritual worlds. For it is not possible to reach this condition without also having achieved a certain level of clairvoyance in the astral. The whole of the astral body is spiritualized at this point. It has become spirit self. This means that the whole astral body is then taken along. Previously, the untransformed portion had to be left behind. Now the entire astral body can be taken into the entire subsequent time. At the moment the astral body has progressed so that it is completely transformed, the new form of the astral body, the spirit self, stamps itself into the etheric body so that it receives an imprint of the transformed astral body. It need not yet have been completely transformed itself, but what has been worked through in the astral body is imprinted into the etheric body. Briefly, we have described a particularly exalted being who has progressed to the most eminent degree, in that the being has developed the whole of the spirit self. Such a being is named Nirmanakaya in Eastern wisdom, for the being's astral body, the astral kaya, has reached the stage where no remnants are left behind. This is Nirmanakaya. Footnote: Nirmanakaya, literally the body that is built, is considered the vehicle that is maintained by one who has renounced nirvana. Hence the body of a Buddha, of compassion, or in Mahayana Buddhism, a bodhisattva. End of footnote. Let us proceed. As human beings, we can continue to work further and further. Ultimately, we can also refashion our etheric and physical bodies. What happens when the etheric and physical bodies are transformed so that they come under our own mastery? Once the etheric body has been transformed, so that one has not only achieved spirit self in one's astral body, but one has also gradually developed life spirit or buddhi in one's etheric body, and once the life spirit is imprinted in the physical body, then the next higher stage of development has been reached. This is a kind of intermediary stage. Through this intermediary stage, one reaches the point where one no longer needs to leave any part of one's etheric body behind. Such an etheric body transformed into life spirit or buddhi continues to exist for all time in the same form. Through such influences, we shall become more and more capable of attaining mastery over our astral and etheric bodies. Such mastery will also enable us, in a certain respect, to direct the astral and etheric bodies. One who has not yet brought the astral body under the mastery of the I will naturally have to wait until this stage is reached. But those who have attained mastery over their astral and etheric bodies can dispose of them freely. They can say, because of what I have been able to experience with my I in many incarnations, which has taught me how to transform my astral and etheric bodies, I have gained the ability, when returning to earth, to fashion new astral and etheric bodies as perfect as the etheric and astral substance out of which they are fashioned. As a result, such individuals can sacrifice their own astral and etheric bodies, transferring them to others. There are individuals who have achieved mastery in their etheric and astral bodies, have learned to reconstruct them, and thereby have become capable of sacrificing their etheric and astral bodies. When they want to return to earth, they construct a new astral body and a new etheric body from available material. What they achieved in perfection, however, is passed on to others who have certain tasks to accomplish in the world. Thus the astral and etheric bodies of earlier individuals are interwoven and assimilated into the astral and the etheric bodies of later individuals. When that occurs, those of a former time not only have an effect from where they currently are, they also work directly into the future through those who carry a portion of the astral and etheric bodies of earlier personalities within their being. Zoroaster, for example, who could manage his astral body, which he later passed on to Hermes, could say, I live, but I shall not only be effective as the outer person I am now, I will also permeate the astral body of the Egyptian Hermes, who will be the founder of the Egyptian cultural epoch. Footnote: Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, or Thoth, was the great Egyptian initiate, legislator, priest, and philosopher. According to tradition, there were 3 Hermes, one of whom antedated the flood, and the last of whom may have lived around 1100 BC. The founders of the Egyptian cultural epoch would then have been the first 2 Hermes. For the anthroposophical view, see also Steiner, Turning Points in the Spiritual History, and the East in the Light of the West. End of footnote. Such a person possesses a body, a kaya, that works not only at the place where one is, but also into the future, proclaiming the law for future development. The law that reaches into the future is called dharma. Such a body is therefore termed a dharmakaya. Footnote: dharmakaya means literally the body of the law. Law has the general meaning of the teachings of Buddha or supreme truth. End of footnote. Such expressions are common in Eastern teaching, and here you have the true explanation of it as it has always been given in primeval wisdom. In surveying the many things we have considered during these days, a question may well arise in our minds as to what humanity really is. We have called the human being a particular stage of development. We have seen that the spirits of personality were human beings on ancient Saturn. Even the thrones must have been human once. And we have discovered that humanity continues to develop, that it will evolve into ever higher forms of being. We have come to know the first stages of this development in angels and archangels, and we have seen how such beings are able to sacrifice a part of themselves. We have seen the beginnings of sacrifice in the thrones, who are beings who possess it to the highest degree. We see the first gleam of creative activities in the leaders of peoples and races who knew how to refashion their own bodies so that something streamed forth from them. Just as the thrones streamed their being forth, so to a different degree the Nirmanakayas let their own bodies stream into the future for the benefit of individuals who would appear later and could not have reached a particular point of development had they not assimilated what streamed from beings who lived before them. Thus, the idea of development moves from the point where one takes to the point where one streams out, creates. The concept of the Creator arises before our spiritual eye, EYE, and we may say that every being evolves from creature to creator. Archangels achieved humanhood on Old Sun, spirits of personality on ancient Saturn, angels on Old Moon, and human beings on the earth. So it will continue. There will always be beings developing into human beings. But does this process continue endlessly? Is it merely an eternal succession of cycles, such as that of the Sun, which repeats what occurred on Saturn, apart from the fact that some beings reach this stage only later? Let me read that last sentence again. Is it merely an eternal succession of cycles, such as that of the Sun, which repeats what occurred on Saturn? That was Old Sun, which repeats what occurred on Old Saturn, apart from the fact that some beings reach this stage only later. The spirits of fire, for example, develop one cycle later than the spirits of personality. But is it really for beings who start as helpless creatures to develop so that they too can bring a sacrifice? No, that is not the case, most definitely not. Is the humanity of the spirits of personality on Saturn the same as that of the archangels on the Sun, and of the angels on Mars, Old Moon, and of humankind here on the earth? If we take, for instance, the nature of the angels, do we only see in them our own future image as it will be on Jupiter? Do we only see in the spirits of fire an image of what we ourselves shall become on Venus? Is there really evidence to say the following: we here on earth shall reach higher stages of development, we too shall advance within the hierarchies, yet the beings we shall become in the future already exist now, and our own stage previously was achieved by other beings in earlier times? Fundamental questions such as these must arise for those who let these lectures work on them impartially. If we are indeed merely dealing with an ever-recurring humanity, then we are identical with the spirits of personality on ancient Saturn, the archangels on the Old Sun, and the angels on Mars, the Old Moon. It may be important to us, but for the gods it would only involve an increase of creatures. No very appreciable progress would thereby have been achieved. It is another matter, however, if human beings, by developing their humanity on the earth, thereby evolve into beings able to contribute something that angels, archangels, and spirits of personality cannot. Has the whole of creation learned something by creating human beings after the archangels and the angels? Has creation advanced? Is it feasible that because humanity has agreed to descend further, it thereby has the prospect to ascend even higher? This is the question that logically follows. We shall devote the final lecture to considering humanity's significance in the cosmos and our relationship to the higher hierarchies. That is, what will ultimately become of humankind in the ranks of the hierarchies.